Ashley stared at them in disbelief. Is this some sort of joke? Brock's response was nonchalant. No, she's pregnant, and she'll be staying here for now. I need you to help prepare the spare bedroom. Brock, this is. It's just. Ashley stammered, clearly struggling to digest the news. She glared at Hannah. What are you? Some kind of gold digger? Hannah laughed. You know what? I guess I sort of am. Ashley's jaw dropped. Brock, who the hell is this? He gently placed a hand on Ashley's shoulder. We'll talk about it later. Let her rest for now. She's pregnant after all. Ashley huffed and stormed off. As uncomfortable tension settled between them, Austin moved toward the empty bedroom. I'll start getting it ready for you. Hannah stopped him. No need. Brock turned to her. I have my own place. I don't need to stay here. Hannah, I'm not sure you fully understand the situation. A faint smirk curled on the edges of her lips. It's all an act, isn't it? No need to overdo it. It's not like the baby will vanish just because I'm staying at my own apartment. If it's an act, it needs to be convincing. We have to live together. Brock stepped into the spare bedroom and glanced around before snapping an order at Austin. Go to the store and pick up some necessities. Bedding, pajamas, toiletries. Then you can go and get her stuff from her apartment tomorrow. Austin nodded, turning to Hannah. So, future sister-in-law, any particular type of bedding you prefer? When Hannah didn't respond, he chuckled awkwardly. All right then, dealer's choice. Austin darted out, leaving only Brock and Hannah alone in the living room. After a tense beat, Brock broke the silence. Where's your ID? We'll need it to process the papers. Hannah passed him her driver's license, and he took a photo of both sides before handing it back. As she watched him, she was shocked by his continued ability to discuss marriage and a child like they were mere transactions to be expedited for his convenience. When she married and had children, she wanted love, respect, the foundation of a lasting partnership. He seemed to not care about any of that. Brock then pulled out his own wallet and handed her a hefty metal credit card. Consider yourself part of the family. You can buy anything you want or need. No need to keep me informed. She took it and flipped it around in her hand. It was simply a sheet of metal with no clear markings or identifications. She had no idea what bank it even came from. Pondering it, she glanced up at Brock. Why do you want to marry me? Why do you want this child? A cold smile played on his lips. Because I find myself in need of a marriage and a child. And frankly, this is all going to be much cleaner than a real one. Hannah took a step back. She knew exactly what she was getting into when she agreed to this. But it was impossible to imagine a man like Brock raising a child on his own. A few days later, Jonathan was wrapping up another dinner at his apartment when he got an unexpected phone call from Hannah's aunt. This is Jonathan. Is everything okay? It's more than okay. I just wanted you to know that Hannah brought home a boyfriend tonight. And it gets better. They're engaged. Jonathan paused as he processed the stunning news. Hannah is engaged? His surprise caught Latham's attention, who wandered over to see what was going on. On the phone, Hannah's aunt continued. Isn't it wonderful? They've been together for about 2 months now. I guess it was love at first sight. And he's a very polite young man. What is his name? Where is he from? His name's Brock. I have his business card somewhere. He works at... But Jonathan interrupted her, his eyes widening in shock. Brock Porter? The heir to the Obsidian Industries? Yes, that's him. Jonathan, do you know him? Jonathan shot a look of concern at Latham, but his voice stayed controlled. We've crossed paths, but only in a business capacity. Well, congratulations on the news. I'll be sure to call Hannah. As Jonathan ended the call, Latham's curiosity came bursting out. Hannah is marrying Brock? Jonathan nodded. Evidently. She introduced him to her family today. Latham sighed. No wonder she's been acting so strangely lately. But why hide it from all of us? Only one way to find out. Jonathan opened his text thread with Hannah and typed out a message. So, I hear you've got news. At that moment, Hannah was alone in her bedroom at Brock's house, and the message from Jonathan immediately brought tears to her eyes. She dreaded talking to him about it because deep down, it felt like she was finally admitting to herself that they would never be together. From that day forward, Jonathan would treat her differently. Her fingers trembled as she began to type, and her blurred vision led to typos, deleting, and retyping until she finally formed a single sentence. It's true, Jonathan. I'm engaged. I was just too shy to tell you. Did my aunt spill the beans? Jonathan rubbed his forehead and responded. I've had my share of complicated situations in the past, but the last year has brought me a lot of clarity. If you love him and he treats you well, we'll all support you. Hannah took a minute to respond, suddenly realizing how hard it was going to be to pretend she truly loved him. I do, and he does. I've already moved into his place. Seeing her response, Jonathan texted back. Well, I'd love to meet him. Let's set something up. Hannah merely liked his message, and then tossed her phone aside, covering her face as she succumbed to her tears. Before long, the bedroom door opened, and Brock stepped inside. Are you crying? Hannah replied through her tears. Can we not do this? Pretend we care about each other? I care about what's inside you, though, and your well-being impacts the baby. So to that extent, I care about you too. Hannah's heart felt like it was submerged in a swamp. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, a sudden pain shot through her abdomen. The sensation felt like her insides were being twisted into knots. A sharp cry escaped Hannah's lips as she broke out in a cold sweat, her body instinctively curling up in pain. Brock reacted instantly, bounding over to the bed. What's happening? What's wrong? Without waiting for a response, he moved to inspect her condition. My stomach. It it hurts all of a sudden. Concern etched on his face. Brock sprung up and flung open the door to the next room. Ashley, we need to get Hannah to the hospital now. Taken aback by Brock's urgency, Ashley stammered. What? Why? She's in pain. Hurry. As Ashley grabbed the keys and headed for the door, Brock spun back and scooped Hannah into his arms. She whimpered in pain as the elevator lurched toward the parking garage, her senses blurred out by the searing pain in her abdomen. Brock swiped her hair out of her face and tapped his foot impatiently. Hang in there, Hannah. The hospital isn't far. A rush of cold air eventually signaled that they were outside, and the next thing Hannah knew, she was being laid down on a gurney under the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital. As they wheeled her in for an emergency ultrasound, Brock stared after her from the end of the hall, and the only thing she could think was that she wished she could call Jonathan. Across town, Nancy was busy packing her bag for her upcoming vacation. As she deliberated over her swimsuit collection, her phone suddenly rang with an unknown number. Hello? Sister, it's me! A familiar voice greeted. Henry, how did your exams go? When are you coming back to New York? Henry's voice trembled as he sniffled back tears. I don't know. Mom won't tell me where she is. And Dad. Guilt gnawed at Nancy's conscience. She knew everything Henry was dealing with, but she had been so engrossed with Jacob, she had overlooked her other little brother. Don't worry, okay, buddy? No matter what happens with your mom, I'll always be here. Your other sisters, too. Get a new card, and I'll transfer you money. In the meantime, I'll figure out a way to get all four of us siblings together again. How does that sound? Thanks, sis. I'd really like that. Just remember, you'll never be alone. She briefly considered telling Henry about Jacob, but decided against it. Everything with Stark was still unresolved, and though Henry was trustworthy, his youth made him a risk that she couldn't afford to take. She reassured herself that there would be plenty of time for them to meet in the future. 2 days later, Nancy, Jonathan, and Jacob embarked on their much-needed 10-day vacation. Upon disembarking after the long flight, Nancy was greeted with the warm, humid air of the Caribbean. The drastic change in weather made her feel like she had time traveled back to summer, and she relished the feeling of the balmy air on her skin. After collecting their luggage, they caught up with Jacob in the airport lobby. As soon as he spotted them, he ran across the hall with all of his luggage and wrapped Nancy in a hug. Sister! Despite already knowing that Jacob could talk, hearing him speak in person for the first time in 4 years brought tears to Nancy's eyes. She cupped his face in her hands and took in the changed man that stood before her, while Jonathan watched on with a broad smile. Before long, they were on their way to the seaside villa in an off-road vehicle driven by Norman. They passed through roads dotted with lush greenery and blooming flowers, and finally stopped at a pristine, colonial-era house that butted up against its own private stretch of beach. As they all climbed out of the car and took in the incredible scenery around them, Jonathan turned to Nancy and spread his arms wide. Our journey has begun. It's beautiful, Jonathan. I don't think I've ever had a chance to relax like this. Ever. Jonathan laughed. And yet I can't help but notice you've brought your work laptop with you. Nancy blushed. It's only for emergencies. Sure it is. Nancy walked toward the beautiful old house, and her gaze fixated on the blue-green sea stretched out before her. It wasn't long ago that the very sound of waves would have triggered a debilitating episode of PTSD for her. But she had worked hard to face her fears, and now she was getting a chance to reap the rewards. Beside her, an equally excited Jacob shook his head in disbelief. Pinch me, sister. This can't be real. At that moment, thousands of miles away in Houston, Stark suddenly found himself thinking about Maria, so he pulled out his phone and wrote her a message. What are you up to, Maria? We need to catch up. Ever since their last meeting, he found himself yearning for her company, desperate to make up for the pain he'd put her through. But business responsibilities hadn't allowed it. With a major delivery scheduled for the next day, things were finally looking like they might stabilize at the Franklin Group. If so, he intended to find ways to spend more time with Maria. Suddenly seeing an opportunity, he followed his first message up with another. You know, I've recently closed a huge deal and it delivers tomorrow. If I visit you next week, will you be free? Nancy paused applying sunscreen to Jonathan's chest when her phone buzzed. Reading Stark's message, she related to Jonathan. Stark's project delivers tomorrow. Looks like everything is on schedule. Jonathan smirked and donned his sunglasses. I hope he likes surprises. When Nancy woke up the next morning, Jonathan had already left the room. She padded to the large French windows overlooking the azure sea, and her heart was instantly soothed by the sight of waves lapping against the shore. As she drank in the view, she heard a rustle behind her and turned to find Jonathan approaching. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. Why didn't you sleep a little longer? Just a little jet-lagged. How about you? Jonathan handed her his phone with a grin. I wanted to see if Stark received my morning gift. Nancy took the phone and burst into laughter as she read the headline. Franklin Group fails to deliver $400 million purchase order. Faces massive fines and Fed scrutiny. I'm afraid your family's stock is about to take a hit. Jonathan's voice held a hint of regret. Your brothers especially. Nancy shook her head. It's all right. Avenging our parents requires certain sacrifices. Besides, who says we can't restore the company to its former glory? Jonathan planted a kiss on her cheek. Planning on becoming my business rival? She gave a teasing smile. You better hope not. Be careful what you wish for, Maria. He pulled her in for a passionate kiss, and she toppled backward onto the deck chair, the cool fabric of her pajamas parting as a shiver of anticipation coursed through her. She placed a hand on Jonathan's chest. Wait, I need to go swimming later. I won't leave a mark. He bent down to continue, and his touch set her nerves aflame, and her resistance quickly melted away. After all, I'd hate to miss seeing you sprawled out in the sun later. She succumbed to his advances, mesmerized by the rippling of his shoulder muscles as he kissed from her chest down to her waist. As he continued to explore, she inhaled sharply and let her eyes flutter closed. Earlier that morning, Stark arrived at the office early and dispatched Vincent, his most trusted assistant, to oversee delivery of the company's largest purchase order to date. Stark had secured a contract to produce 10,000 advanced semiconductors for a large aerospace firm called Astrodyne, and the funding had proved integral to the turnaround in the Franklin Group's stock price. He had to lowball the competition and even promise the units in half the time. It was a huge bet on the team's capabilities, but today was the day that the bet would pay off. As he brainstormed ways to get his hard-won victory into the news, there was a knock on his office door. Vincent entered, and it was obvious from his face that there was a problem. Stark's eyes narrowed. What is it? Vincent's eyes broke contact, his anxiety clear. It's the purchase order, sir. Somehow we were short by 10,000 units. Stark was bewildered. That's impossible. 10,000 units was the entire order. That's what I thought too, sir. And that's what we delivered. But somehow the signed contract says 20,000. And we agreed to those massive penalty fees in order to get the deal done. No, that's not right. I negotiated that contract myself. I would never have agreed to 20,000. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up his own copy of the digital contract, certain it would verify his version of events. But when it finally loaded, his jaw dropped. There it was in black and white, 20,000 units, with his own signature at the bottom. His heart hammered in his chest, and his mind raced as he tried to recall the negotiations. He distinctly remembered having a private dinner with the Astrodome CEO, where they had gone into great detail about a reasonable price and timeline. There was zero doubt in his mind, but somehow every contract seemed to contain the same mysterious figure. Despite the fine proof, he sent Vincent to compile every copy of the contract and every draft leading up to the final one. He returned half an hour later and shook his head grimly. Every document, digital and physical, stated 20,000 units. Just then, Stark's phone rang. It was Astrodone's CEO, Rick Fleury. What the hell is going on, Stark? We have our own distribution contracts that rely on the goods you promised us. If you breach this contract, we'll come at you for every penny. I understand, Rick. The problem is the contracts. We both know we agreed to 10,000, but somehow the paperwork got revised to reflect a different number. I've heard some crappy excuses in my day, but that sets a new record. If you don't find 10,000 semiconductors in the next hour, I'll see you in court. Rick hung up, and Stark slammed his phone down, cracking the screen. He looked out the window of his office. The reporters were already swarming. Rick had clearly leaked the news in order to put pressure on him. Just as he picked up the phone to call his manufacturing team and get a timeline on the rest of the semiconductors, his phone buzzed with a call from Damien. Hi, Stark. No luck on Jacob yet, but I did manage to dig up some information on Sabrina that I think you'll be interested in. Stark had too much on his plate already, but he tried to stay patient. All right. What is it? Olivia is dead. Esther assumed her identity and used the Sabrina moniker to create more distance. She seems to have won the good graces of Brock Porter over at Obsidian, and now she's launched the perfume brand I'm sure you know about. Looks like she's been in Los Angeles for the last few weeks, setting up a West Coast operation from the looks of it. Stark squinted, processing the information. Do you think Jacob could be there? I can't confirm or deny that, but I have traced Esther's movements and just sent you her whereabouts. I'll let you know if I find any more leads. As Stark hung up, Vincent burst back into his office. What's the plan, boss? The press are starting to run with a story. If we don't give them something. The veins in Stark's forehead throbbed. I don't know. What about surveillance footage? Check the cameras for the room where we signed it. Vincent hesitated. Stark, the surveillance records only go back a month. We've just passed. A chill ran down Stark's spine as the pieces finally started falling together. Astrodyne had graciously offered him an extra week to deliver, and given the penalty payments Stark had agreed to, Astrodyne stood to benefit massively from his failure to deliver. As he ran his fingers over the contract Vincent had brought him, his eyes darkened, and he growled out a single word. Jonathan. Stark had been suspicious when Jonathan invited him to drink with an important client, even more so when Jonathan allowed him to exchange business cards. But he had been desperate, and as the deal proceeded, everything seemed by the book, and his suspicions subsided. Now it was as clear as day. Jonathan had somehow masterminded the entire thing, but that still didn't explain how he'd gotten onto every server and into every filing cabinet to adjust the contracts. Could he have worked with someone on the inside? Unsurprisingly, it wasn't long before Stark's phone rang again. This time, it was the chairman of the board. We are all in the meeting room waiting for you. We need you to take control of the situation. Stark's chest rose and fell with the rhythm of his seething anger. His eyes smoldered with irritation. We don't have the full picture yet, and I'm initiating an investigation. As a major shareholder, I think you'd be the last person who would want to spook the markets. Too late, Stark. The chairman flicked his call on speakerphone, and Stark heard a newscaster speaking on the other side. The Franklin Group is potentially facing a financial payout of roughly $40 million to aerospace startup Astrodyne. While experts believe the company has enough cash reserves to cover the payout, it's another black mark after a long period of stuttering leadership. It goes without saying that the company is suffering its greatest credibility crisis since its inception a century ago. Stark's face grew red with rage, and he roared into the phone. Shut it off! Now! The chairman's snide laughter resonated over the line as he returned the phone to his ear. You were chosen to lead the Franklin Group solely out of loyalty. If you don't turn this around, we'll find someone who can. The words stung like a slap in the face, but Stark knew he only had so much leeway to push back. At this point, a single misstep could cost him everything. Burning with frustration, Stark saw no other option except to go to the source. He called Damien and barked out a question before he could even say hello. Where is Jonathan? Damien hesitated. All I know is he's out of the country. I can't track down his exact location. What exactly am I paying you for? Stark's eyes blazed with rage. Fire me if you want, but it won't help you. If a man like Jonathan decides to go underground, he's not going to be found. Stark hung up in a huff and glanced at the information he'd sent on Esther earlier. She was at the Beverly Hills Hotel with no checkout date. He narrowed his eyes and punched the button for the intercom. Get me on the next flight to Los Angeles and alert the police. Someone's infiltrated our systems and tampered with the contract. At that exact moment, Xavier was in his office going through a report when he received a call. It was his cousin, a visual artist, who had agreed to make an elaborate arrangement for all the lipstick Xavier had bought Esther. Excitement warmed Xavier's heart, and he quickly ran downstairs to meet her. Xavier had told her he wanted the display to look like a bouquet of flowers, and she'd done an incredible job. It wouldn't just be a way for Esther to store her cosmetics. It was a beautiful piece of art as well. As he gushed over it, his cousin looked him up and down and shook her head. Since you said you're in the game of romance now, I brought you some new clothes. I've never seen you wear anything but black suits and white shirts. And no offense, but no one is going to date you if they don't even notice you. Xavier took the clothes with a reluctant sigh, and then his cousin spun him around and shoved him back toward his office building. Now get back to work, and bring your girlfriend to meet me next time she's in town. The whole family's waiting for you to tie the knot. Xavier had booked his flight to Los Angeles as soon as he'd gotten word that his cousin was nearly done. So he set off for the airport the next morning with his carefully packed gifts in tow. The next morning, Esther woke up early to prepare for a vital meeting with her West Coast investment team. Brock was originally supposed to attend the meeting with her, but he'd been held up with some emergency back in New York and asked her to fly solo. This was the first time she'd led such a large-scale meeting, and by the time she was finished, her temples were throbbing. Desperate for a moment to decompress, she hustled back to her desk, where her eyes fell on an unexpected sight. A beautifully wrapped box with her name written in calligraphy and the seal of an extremely niche and hard-to-find cosmetic brand. Esther spun around to her assistant with wide eyes. What is this? And where did it come from? Somebody left it for you at the front desk. Tina at the front desk described him as a prime cut of man meat. But you know how she is. Esther laughed. Yeah, desperate. Do you know if he's still out there? Only if Tina hasn't gobbled him up yet. A ripple of anxiety stirred in Esther's heart as she made her way towards the door. Could it be Stark? He had mentioned compensating her the last time he'd seen her, but after the failed abduction, she'd figured he would lay low for a while. Just as she neared the door leading out to the front desk, an assistant intercepted her. There's a guy asking for you in the lounge. How did he get in there? The assistant shrugged, and Esther rolled her eyes, changing course and stepping into the nearby employee lounge. The room was bathed in light, and a lone figure was perched on the leather couch, his suit immaculate. As he noticed her, his eyes glinted with intrigue, and his lips curved into a warm smile. A smile that, paradoxically, sent a cold shiver down her spine. She narrowed her eyes and set her jaw, her voice determined. So it's you. For a brief moment, Esther had considered the possibility that the lipstick had been from Xavier, but she saw now that Stark had indeed tracked her down. Her heart pounded as she took a seat across from him, her smile unfaltering. I have to say, I'm touched by your gift, but I'm afraid my husband will be jealous. Gift? I'm not sure I understand, Miss Williams. Esther's smile froze momentarily, then recovered. You seem to have me confused with someone else again. Stark crossed his legs nonchalantly as he slid a stack of documents toward Esther. Let's dispense with pretenses, Esther. Esther opened the file and found a ream of documents that Stark had collected on her, Olivia, and her pseudonym, Sabrina. She read through them impassively, then looked up. It's a shame you didn't become a screenwriter, Stark. You have a real talent for melodrama. A faint smile played on his lips. You know, you've changed considerably in the past 2 years. You're much calmer, much more captivating, if you don't mind me saying. Me, not so much. But my husband... Enough! Stark's voice rose just enough to catch Esther off guard. Seeming to sense her discomfort, he pressed his advantage. Did you arrange for Jonathan Davis to take Jacob? Or was it just your little boyfriend, Brock? Esther met his gaze, unflinching. You know, I saw the news about the Franklin Group yesterday. You're starting to sound a little panicked. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but I won't sit idly by while you and Jonathan destroy everything I've built. And while his family is considerably harder to reach, yours happens to live walking distance from my house. Tell me, Do they still have that adorable tire swing in the front yard? Esther's heart pounded at the mention of her family, but Jonathan had assured her they were being guarded. Stark was just testing her. She glanced up, her tone still mild. I'm sure they do. You should go give it a try. Seems like you'll have lots of free time on your hands soon. You're a survivor, Esther. I'll give you that. But surely you know how big of a risk you're taking. What's in it for you? Besides another plunge into the sea, I mean. Stark abruptly stood and stepped toward her. Her palms went clammy, and she scrambled to her feet, inching backward toward the door. As confident as she'd been that he wouldn't hurt her in public, she was suddenly feeling less sure. She scuffled backwards toward the door, but just as she got there, it swung open. A firm, warm hand took a hold of hers, and Esther whipped her head around to see who had shown up just in time. It was Xavier. His icy gaze was locked onto Stark, and his voice came out a stern rumble. You've crossed a line. Esther tried to withdraw her hand, but her body seemed to have been drained of all its strength. Stark's menace had seeped into her soul, and having her disguises stripped away had made her feel far more vulnerable than she expected. Shielding her with his body, Xavier moved Esther behind him, his towering figure acting as a barrier. Watch yourself, Stark. This isn't over. As he led her out of the room, Stark's frosty gaze followed them like an unshakable specter. It was only when Xavier got her back into her office that Esther came back alive. She tugged her hand free with a determined jerk, and as her nerves calmed, she noticed for the first time that Xavier was dressed entirely unlike his usual self. He wore a fitted polo, skinny trousers, and hip sneakers. Given how uptight he always was, it was a refreshingly casual look. As Xavier's gaze drifted toward the lipstick, Esther realized her mistake and felt a surge of anger. Did you bring me that? Xavier nodded. Why? I overheard your conversation with Latham and... But Esther interrupted him, visibly upset. You aren't my husband, Xavier, and you aren't my boyfriend either. I'm not even sure you're my friend. His eyes instantly narrowed, and his aura shifted, chillingly cold. In mere moments, he had her pinned against the wall. And you're not Olivia. Or are you getting too lost in the role? This version of Xavier was somewhat alien to Esther, but in a strange way, she relished the open competition. Esther managed to smile, her voice indifferent and slightly aloof. Believe what you want, Xavier. I have work to do. You know the way out. Brushing aside her cold retort, Xavier kept her pinned to the wall. Jonathan filled me in on everything that's happened to you. She gave him a slow, sad smile. I'm happy for you, but I'd appreciate it if you kept your insides to yourself. I want you to know that I can handle Stark, and I've pieced together the men's clothes and the ashtray in your apartment. Again, I'm happy for you. Anything else? He scrutinized her face, but she gave nothing away. She couldn't believe he hadn't learned by now that she wasn't some damsel in distress, that she was never going to collapse into his arms because of a bunch of dumb makeup and well-timed appearance. His hand trailed down from her shoulder, brushing her forearm before finally collapsing her hand. You understand what I'm getting at, Esther. You upended my life 3 years ago, and now that you've been brought back into it, I'm not ready to let you go again. What do you want from me? I told you. Go out with me. Hearing his words, a smile bloomed on Esther's face. Well, it's a whole new Xavier, isn't it? You're dressing better. You're speaking your mind. What's next? Are you going to adopt a puppy and take him on hikes? Xavier stared into her eyes as he closed the distance between them. You don't know me as well as you think you do. Before Esther could react, her breath had been swallowed up by a forceful kiss. He was more passionate than ever before, unrestrained in a way that she'd never experienced. His presence seemed to engulf her, his determination unlike anything she'd seen before. It was as if he wished to consume her entirely. And she liked it. She rested her hand on his chest in an act of feigned resistance, allowing his inferno of a kiss to continue until her lips were numb. Suddenly, he took her hand off his chest and pressed a kiss against her fingertips. The contact was sharp, like a shock, and Esther recoiled instinctively, only to find her hand once again firmly captured by Xavier. He whispered to her through panted breaths. "I admit that I haven't always understood you, but I intend to change that. You said you want to be married before you turn 29? That gives us plenty of time." Esther narrowed her eyes, wondering whether this audacious new Xavier was the real thing, or just an outfit he decided to try on for a day. Squirming free of his grasp, she smoothed out her clothes and turned toward her desk. "I have work to do, Xavier. This isn't a joke. I'm establishing an entirely new market on my own." Xavier nodded. "When will you be going home?" "Which home do you mean?" A look of pity flashed across Xavier's face. "Fly back to New York with me. Once we've settled things with Stark, I'll take you back to Houston myself. You can introduce me to the accountant." Xavier gave a rare smirk, and Esther chuckled in surprise. "I'm not a game piece. You can't just move me around whenever you want. We'll cross those bridges when we get to them." As Esther returned to work, Xavier sat on the sofa and trained his gaze on the woman across the room. Memories of their first encounter resurfaced, and the details remained vivid, despite not having any idea it was an important moment until years later. She walked into the negotiation room in an immaculate business suit, and he remembered being in awe of her ability to combine professionalism and elegance. During dinner, she battled over prices and terms with an intensity bordering on frightening. Despite her remarkable performance, he assumed their relationship would end after the deal. But fate had a different plan. The next time he saw her, she was almost unrecognizable. The gleam in her eyes during negotiations had been replaced by weariness and loneliness, and her pantsuit by a simple, casual romper. After that, their encounters seemed to be more frequent, and her mood seemed to progressively improve. Before long, they were having long conversations, with her doing the vast majority of the talking and him nodding along. Most women he'd met had resented his soft-spoken nature, but she was different. She allowed him to be himself, while she was always vibrant and tireless. Their relationship finally seemed poised to take the next step when she invited him to dinner and a movie. He had wanted to go, but an unexpected visit from a college friend thwarted their plans. She suggested a rain check, but in the days that followed, her messages mysteriously ceased. He wondered if she'd seen his unavailability as a rejection, or if it had left a small opening and another man had slipped in and stolen her heart. Regardless, the sudden silence felt like a tiny hole in his heart. He found himself eyeing his quiet phone, wondering how she'd managed to weave herself into the fabric of his life so effortlessly. When they finally met again, it was back at the negotiating table. She treated him as a stranger, ferociously advocating for her company's interests and virtually shouting him down when he dissented. To his excitement, the meeting seemed to rekindle her feelings for him, and they picked back up where they left off. They continued this way for nearly 3 months, until one day, out of nowhere, he received a frosty text message from her. "I'm tired. Sorry to have troubled you the past few months." He was taken aback, double-checking the sender before reality settled in. His friends had warned him that she had a reputation for tossing men away after only a few minutes, but he was certain he would be the exception. When he looked up at his wall calendar, he discovered it had been 3 months to the day. He replied to her message with a single word. "Okay." And just like that, everything halted. Without a second glance, she vanished from his world. It suddenly began to seem like the entire thing had some wicked game that she only played until she got bored of it and tossed it away. As heartbroken as he was that it had ended, the part that really stuck with him was stupid. He felt for convincing himself that he'd ever had a special place in his life. Life eventually reverted to its ordinary rhythms, but Xavier found himself more closed off than ever. After what Esther made him feel, he was committed to never letting anyone get that close to him again. But of course, Life rarely works the way we plan it. 2 years later, she abruptly re-entered his life, but she was no longer the straight-haired, innocent girl he remembered. Her hair had grown wavy with age, and the ferociousness she once possessed had distilled into a captivating blend of confidence and tenacity. She was so ambivalent when they first interacted that night that he thought she might have forgotten him altogether. But as their paths continued to cross, he felt the unmistakable glow of his love for her growing within him again. Now, having seen her save Sydney and stand up to Stark, the glow had grown into an inferno. And nothing, not even Esther, would be able to put it out this time. 2 hours passed before Esther realized that Xavier had never left. He was still quietly perched on her couch, engrossed in something on his laptop. Whatever else was true about Xavier, she had to admit that she admired his persistence. As she pondered how to handle the situation, Xavier suddenly glanced up and they locked eyes. Feeling awkward, she searched for a conversation starter. So, what's with the new style? Desperate to fit in Los Angeles? Insecurity flashed across Xavier's face, and Esther suddenly realized he had done it for her. He cleared his throat. You don't like it? No, I do. I'm just not used to seeing you dressed this way. It's a first for me, too. Well, it suits you. It makes you seem younger. Besides, a little change now and then can add some spice to life. Xavier fell silent, and Esther turned back to her work when she suddenly heard his voice. Did I seem that old before? Esther rolled her eyes playfully. Well, someone needs a lot of validation today. You never looked old, just a little stiff. Xavier nodded, and after another charged beat, they both got back to work. Back in the Caribbean, Nancy was just waking up when she spotted a message from Esther about Stark's unexpected appearance. She turned to Jonathan, who was next to her reading the news. Looks like Stark made another move on Esther. He knows she's not Olivia. He probably just wanted to intimidate her. After all, the person he's really after is Jacob. I'll increase security around her family just in case. Nancy nodded. You don't think Stark could turn this around on us, do you? His stock took a nosedive yesterday, and he's under investigation by the FTC. He's only taking risks like this because we've backed him into a corner. Trust me, all we have to do is keep turning up the pressure until he makes a mistake. Nancy smiled. If I didn't know any better, I think you were enjoying this. Jonathan shrugged. Who says you can't mix business and pleasure? The next morning, Stark made his way to a quiet cafe and ensconced himself at a table, pondering his next move. His rivals were closing in around him, and he was no closer to finding Jacob than he had been a month earlier. Just then, he got a phone call from Vincent. This better be good news. Vincent hesitated. I'm sorry, sir. The police have been here all day, but they can't find any signs of forced entry or foul play. Same goes for our digital security team. Whoever hacked us is an absolute pro. Stark clutched his coffee with an iron grip, and he was about to respond when a memory suddenly sprung to his mind from a decade earlier. He was home from boarding school on winter break and had walked into the house to find Nancy reading a bedtime story to Jacob. It was a trite folktale about a scorpion and a frog, where the scorpion asked the frog for a ride across the river, only to sting the frog halfway across the river and doom them both to drowning. The moral of the story was that some people can never change, even when it works against their best interest. Stark thought back and chuckled bitterly as he reminisced. Perhaps he'd become the scorpion after all, but if that was really the case, he was damn sure going to take everyone else down with him. Just as Stark finished his coffee and stood up to leave, a news alert caught his attention, and a wicked grin spread across his face. At that exact moment, Jonathan and Jacob were swimming in the ocean, diving against the waves and throwing a frisbee back and forth. Nancy, on the other hand, laid sprawled out in the warm sand, soaking in the clean air and the joyous sounds of her fiancé and her brother playing in the water. The past few days had been spent in a blissful rhythm, and for Nancy, it was a precious glimpse of the life they all might have once Stark had finally been eliminated. They would wake up early and swim all day, and in the evenings, they would eat an elaborate meal prepared by a local chef while Jonathan taught Jacob the basics of business management. After all, in a few short years, Jacob would inherit a controlling share of the Franklin Group and be tasked with leading it forward. When Jonathan and Jacob finally emerged from the water, they laid down next to Nancy and caught their breath. Jacob looked at Jonathan in awe, and Nancy's heart swelled. "How was the swim, boys?" Jacob smiled. "Jonathan showed me how to swim with the waves instead of against them, and explained how you have to do the same thing in business." Nancy laughed and tilted her sunglasses down. "I guess there's no activity that can't be ruined with a business lesson." Just then, Norman came running down from the house, a rare look of panic on his face. Without a word, he thrust a phone in Jonathan's face, and Nancy watched as his eyes went wide. "What is it, Jonathan?" He looked up and locked eyes with her. "It's Steve. There's been an explosion in Mexico, and he's in critical condition." "Oh my God!" The blood drained from Jonathan's face, and he leapt to his feet, charging toward the house. "Get us on the next plane to Mexico, Norman, and find out how the hell this happened." A shudder ran through Nancy's body, and she reached out, grabbing him by the wrist. "Wait, we still don't know what happened, Jonathan. What if it's a trap?" "I'll be careful, but I have to get down there. I don't think this was an accident, and if my hunch is right, then the sooner we respond, the safer we'll be in the long run. The second we're seen as being weak, it will turn into open season." Jonathan and Norman rushed ahead to make arrangements, while Nancy and Jacob lagged behind. Her heart pounded as she imagined the severity of Steve's injuries, and pangs of guilt stabbed at her as she thought of his initial departure and of the last time she'd seen him. Despite everything they'd been through, she felt like she was on the cusp of losing a brother. Inside the house, Jonathan called Jack while he hurriedly packed their belongings. When his voice finally came through, it was laden with concern. "You heard the news, Jonathan?" His movements were bordering on frantic, but his voice remained steady. "Tell me everything you know, Jack. How is he?" "It's critical. He's lost a lot of blood, and they had him in chest compressions for over an hour before they got him to the hospital. He's breathing, but he's unconscious, and they have no idea how long his heart had been stopped before they found him." Jonathan's voice caught in his throat. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath and formulated a plan. "Tell the doctors to buy as much time as they can. We'll be there in 4 hours with the best surgeons and medical equipment we can find." Just then, Nancy chimed in. "One of my dad's former colleagues is the best trauma surgeon in the country. I can't contact him, but Jacob could, and Houston is on the way." Jonathan nodded and turned to Jacob. "Do you think you can handle that?" "Yes, of course." Jonathan returned to the phone and barked orders at Jack. "Find me the closest private jet we can rent, and secure the fastest route to Mexico, with a stop in Houston." At that moment, an unconscious Steve had just been rolled into the operating theater. With no time to spare, the nurses cut away his clothes and threw them to the side. As a flurry of doctors tended to his wounds and measured his vitals, a small metallic head had peeked out from one of his pockets. It was Frida, the robot Nancy made for him. It had been badly damaged in the explosion, and its indicator light flicked inconsistently, teetering on the brink of complete shutdown. Just then, a doctor's voice rang out in the sterile quiet of the operating room. "Patient's heart rate is plummeting. Prepare for defibrillation." The nearest trauma nurse grabbed the defibrillator paddles off the wall and rubbed them together, a high-pitched whine signaling their charge. She pressed them to his chest and shouted to the room. "Clear!" Steve's body convulsed with the electric shock, and he let out a low moan. His heartbeat returned to normal, and the nurse sighed in relief as she rushed the paddles back to their holsters. In the pile of discarded clothes, Frida seemed to hear Steve's groan and flashed to life. Its voice was glitchy, but it had the same sycophantic tone as always. "There you are, master. What a wonderful time for a nap. When you wake up, you'll be refreshed and ready to take on the world. May all your days be filled with morning dew, afternoon sunlight, and the stars of night. May all things beautiful accompany you." Lying on the hospital bed, Steve's eyes darted around beneath his eyelids. He had momentarily regained consciousness and recognized the familiar words coming from Frida. With no sense of place or time, the sound of the little robot's voice filled his mind with memories of Maria. He remembered the night she gave it to him. It was the first time he realized that she contained multitudes, and while he still resented her, he now understood that it was the moment that the seed of his love had been planted. His fingers twitched, and his eyes felt like they had been weighed down by invisible anchors. His body was numb with pain, and as the torment overwhelmed him, he could feel his consciousness being slowly consumed, and death reaching out its welcome arms. As his brain fell quiet for what he feared might be the last time, he realized he only had one regret: that he didn't get to see Maria one last time. By this point, Nancy and Jonathan had already taken to the skies and were about to touch down at a private airport near Houston, where a frost-haired man waited for them on the tarmac. He was flanked by a team of assistants and all of the surgical equipment they could scrape together. And after a mere 15 minutes of loading, they were back in the air, cutting across the dark sky towards the jungles of central Mexico. Their flight was a race against the cruel hand of death itself. When Nancy and Jonathan finally arrived in Mexico, the group quickly boarded a rugged off-road vehicle and sped toward the hospital. They were greeted at the front entrance by Steve's assistant, Travis. "Steve is still in surgery, but he's hanging on." Jonathan gave a somber nod, turning to the group of medical experts they'd brought with them. "I guess that's your cue, Dr. Monahan. Thank you all for being here. We're counting on you." Once the doctors had been escorted in by a nurse, Jonathan turned back to Travis. "Take me to the site of the explosion. I want to see it before everything gets muddled by the police." Travis nodded and quickly led him away. As they exited the hospital, a swarm of reporters who had caught wind of the situation descended upon them. "Jonathan, what's your nephew's status? Was this an accident or a malicious attack? How will this affect your company's aircraft project?" Jonathan pushed through the crowd with steely eyes, microphones grazing his clothes as the reporters pursued him relentlessly. Finally, he turned back, his eyes smoldering with ferocity. "Back off." The sheer force of his presence was enough to stun the lead reporter, who stumbled backward into the wide-eyed group behind him. Seizing the moment, Jonathan swung open a car door and disappeared inside with Travis. The site of the explosion was still cordoned off, but the scattered debris told a tale of its brutality. Jonathan surveyed the cratered epicenter and turned to Travis with a frown. "Was Steve really at the center of this? I suggest you watch the surveillance footage. It's grainy, but you can see that Steve noticed something was wrong and tried to escape right before the explosion." Jonathan nodded, taking in the footage on the laptop Travis handed him. In the video, Steve appeared nonchalant, almost as if he was lounging in the control room. The personnel around him went about their work, offering him respectful nods as they passed. After ending a phone call, Steve was about to retrieve something from his pocket when he abruptly stood and made a break for it. But the explosion was too swift, the shockwave tossing him like a rag doll before the video feed abruptly goes dark. Jonathan flinched at the footage, then looked up at Travis. "Has anyone noticed any unfamiliar faces lately? Or unusual activity?" Travis shrugged apologetically. "There are consistently new people. The workforce is inconsistent, and many of them don't have IDs. Some work for a month, earn their pay, and then stop coming back, or head north toward the city. With the construction targets we set, we had to cut some corners on security." Jonathan fell silent, rewinding the footage and scrutinizing it frame by frame. He spotted the small, round object Steve was reaching for and suddenly recognized it. It was Frida. Jonathan's mind whirled. If Frida was still in Steve's possession, and hadn't been destroyed, it was entirely possible it could hold the answers to what happened. Putting the laptop away, Jonathan scanned the area around the crater for any sign of shrapnel or debris that might help him identify the source of the bomb. He quickly identified a small bag by the door to the ventilation shaft and called Travis over to investigate. As Jonathan scoured the site of the incident, back at the hospital, the doors to the operating room finally swung open. Nancy had kept a tense vigil outside, and her heart leapt into her throat at the sign of movement. As she stood, she noticed movement behind her and turned to see Steve's mother, Sophia, rushing toward her, trailed by a handful of attendants. As Steve was wheeled out, Sophia's eyes welled up. "Steve, my beautiful boy, what happened to you?" The doctor wiped the thick layer of sweat off his forehead and met her gaze. "We've done everything we could. We managed to stabilize him, but he remains unconscious. If he doesn't wake up soon, we have to consider the possibility of serious brain damage." Sophia nearly fainted, collapsing into the arms of a quick-thinking attendant. From a few feet behind them, Nancy glanced at Steve's silent figure on the hospital bed. His eyes were closed, and his breath looked so faint as to be nearly non-existent. His face bore countless bruises and lacerations, but it struck Nancy that they did nothing to hide his handsome features. She struggled to accept that the man, who had been so full of energy and ambition the last time she'd seen him, had been reduced to such a pitiful state. Though she had never reciprocated his affections, he had nonetheless been the first person she'd met after her rebirth. Their contract had been her salvation from Chris's wrath, and made it possible for her to take the first step toward becoming the woman she was today. Hearing the doctor's prognosis, Nancy felt the haunting pain of losing a loved one once again, and the all-too-familiar chill of grief began closing in around her. It seemed to take a moment for Sophia to regain her composure. As the doctor prepared to wheel Steve away, she clutched the edge of the bed. "Where are you taking him? He should be monitored around the clock." The exhausted surgeon gritted his teeth. "Ma'am, there's nothing more we can do for him in the operating room. We're taking him to the intensive care unit, and you're welcome to accompany us if you like." Sophia nodded slowly, with a dazed look in her eyes. "Right, of course. He'll be just fine there." As Nancy followed the rest of the medical team to the ICU, a nurse suddenly pulled her off to the side. "You must be the patient's wife. We found this in his clothes during surgery, and it started to speak, so we removed it from the room. I just wanted to make sure it got back to his family." Nancy was about to correct the nurse's mistake, but when she handed Nancy the damaged Frida, her words suddenly caught in her throat. Her eyes, already brimming with tears, immediately spilled over. The ICU was filled with the families of other people injured in the blast, but Nancy was able to secure the last private room available for Steve. When she finally entered, a cluster of people surrounded his bedside. Making her way through the huddle, she found herself at the foot of the bed, finally able to see him up close. Sophia had been crying incessantly, but despite her tear-streaked face, she had managed to maintain her composure. A number of her assistants were equally upset, and the air in the room was thick with melancholy. Steve's body was shielded under a thin sheet, and though Nancy longed to know the extent of his injuries, she didn't dare pick up the sheet to find out. After a moment, Sophia looked up and locked eyes with Nancy. "Maria? What are you doing here?" Nancy inhaled sharply. "I heard about Steve's injuries and came to see him. After everything we've been through, it only seemed right." Sophia merely nodded, and her gaze fell back on Steve. "I'm sure he appreciates the support. You always held a special place in his heart." "He said that?" "You know Steve. He's a man of few words, but a mother knows. I tried to set him up with Chloe 1,000 times, but he only ever seemed to have eyes for you." Nancy bit her lip and glanced at Steve's battered face, a wave of guilt crashing over her. "Maria, come here." Nancy glanced up and scooted around the bed to Sophia's side. "Just tell me what you need, Miss Davis. Anything at all." "Please, call me Sophia. We're practically family at this point. She paused, gently squeezing Steve's hand. I don't know how to say this, but could you try to talk to him? Try to help him wake up? It sounds silly, but I know you two are close, and a mother will try anything. Nancy looked into Sophia's pleading eyes, feeling a pang in her heart. She nodded. Of course, I'd be happy to. Sophia nodded in gratitude, then ushered everyone else from the room, leaving Nancy alone in the room, with only the sound of Steve's fragile breaths and the rhythmic beeping of his heart monitor. She sat down by his bedside and spoke softly. Steve, can you hear me? Nancy reached for Frida and switched it on. Look, even Frida has come to see you. The small robot sprung to life in her palm. Maria, you came to see me. I'm used to Steve being quiet, but this is a long silence, even for him. Nancy laughed. That's why I'm here, to help bring him back. Should I sing a song? He always tells me to shut up when I sing him a song, so that will probably get his attention. Just as she was about to respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. The door swung open, and in walked Jonathan and Sophia. Jonathan froze at the sight of his badly wounded nephew, but before he could utter a word, Sophia sneered at him. Are you happy? I told you not to send him down here alone. Jonathan's heart sank at his sister's fury, so he backed away from her and kept a calm tone. Let's not do this in front of him, okay? As soon as they stepped outside the room, the fury in Sophia's eyes ignited. Everyone could see this coming except for you. Remember how your older brother treated you when you were young? And this is how you repay him? Jonathan's voice was weighed down with regret. I'm sorry. I thought he could handle it. Oh, good. You're sorry. Maybe if you say it loud enough, it will wake your nephew up from his coma. Sophia's chest heaved with fury, and she was on the brink of hysterics. You have to have faith, Sophia. Your son is an incredibly strong man, and I've done everything I can to. But before Jonathan could finish, Sophia lunged forward, gripping his arm so tightly that her nails nearly broke his skin. I should have known how bad the conditions were when Steve wouldn't allow me to visit him. He's in the jungle in the middle of nowhere, for God's sake. Jonathan's mind churned with a mix of guilt and resentment, but he knew it wouldn't help to provoke Sophia more. Noticing his silence, Sophia's face curled into a cruel smirk. This was all part of your plan, wasn't it? If Steve dies, you have the entire business all to yourself. Jonathan sighed. Listen to yourself, Sophia. There were obviously security lapses, and I take responsibility for that. But I would never knowingly send Steve into harm's way. He was down here doing vital work that would prepare him for the future, especially one where I might not be around. You're like a vampire, Jonathan, sucking the life out of your own family. Jonathan met his sister's terrified gaze, and a heavy weight pressed down on his heart. What he'd said to Sophia was true, but it wasn't the full truth. He'd given Steve the assignment in Mexico with an ulterior motive, and did ultimately bear some of the blame for what had happened. But that wasn't the only factor at play. His actions were also a hedge against his own vulnerability. He had sent Steve away in order to eliminate competition for Nancy. But it was just convenient timing. He had never intended to make Steve stay in Mexico for longer than necessary. And he knew from experience that the skills Steve would gain from running such a complex operation would be critical for running the company if Jonathan didn't make it past 32. But Sophia was in no place to hear all of that, and he knew it. Finally, he broke the silence. I'll explain everything another time. Please believe me. I only want the best for Steve. I've seen enough of my brothers pass away, and the last thing I would ever do is plot such a tragedy for my own nephew. Sophia's eyes blazed, but she seemed to have lost the appetite for fighting. Without a word, she spun around and re-entered Steve's room. As the door shut behind Sophia, Jonathan spotted Nancy at Steve's bedside, huddled up next to his ear, and whispering gently. Sunlight streamed through the window of Steve's hospital room, gently warming Nancy as she tended to the damaged Frida. While she worked, she chatted idly with the unconscious Steve. You know, Steve, Frida seems to think you could make more friends if you were a little more open to small talk. She says you're aloof. She tweaked a circuit in Frida's back, and the light on its head flashed. I've always assumed you were just one of those people that was hard to get to know, and once anyone did, you'd be rewarded with boundless affection. Care to settle the debate? She glanced up at Steve, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Well, looks like Frida was right. You really are a stoic. As she continued chattering, Nancy linked Frida to her phone and accessed its language library, chuckling softly. Frida says you need a wingman to help you break the ice. So while I'm in here, I'm going to teach you how to compliment women in Spanish for you. Despite a lack of sophisticated tools or replacement parts, Nancy eventually managed to repair most of Frida's core circuits. It couldn't move, but its indicators and sensors were all functioning normally. Success! Okay, Steve, I'm going to step out, but I'll leave Frida here to keep you company. At the end of the hall, Nancy found Jonathan washing his face in a sink, his hair clinging damply to his forehead. Upon hearing her approach, he lifted his gaze, and she saw that his eyes were bloodshot and slightly puffy. She'd overheard the intense confrontation outside and felt the sting of Sophia's distrust, but she had no idea it had affected him so seriously. She reached out and squeezed his hand. Don't let her get to you. She's just scared and wants someone to blame it on. He simply nodded and returned the squeeze of her hand. Once Steve wakes up, they'll come around. They've seen how much you've done for your family over the years, Steve included. Jonathan kept nodding, then glanced past Nancy down the hall before pulling her into a restroom and locking the door behind them. His embrace was strong and enveloping, his chin resting against her forehead, and his voice barely above a whisper. Maria, I've watched all my brothers pass away, one after another, and I always felt helpless. I worked my whole life to make sure I would be able to handle anything that came my way, but I never thought anyone would target someone so close to me. Jonathan sighed, then continued. I thought sending him here would be for his benefit, that it would help him grow and improve as a leader. If I had any clue he was so vulnerable. Jonathan's grip tightened around her, and his voice dropped to a whisper. Do you believe he'll wake up? As long as Nancy had known Jonathan, he had always been a rock-steady presence, an unshakable pillar of strength. As long as he was around, it felt like nothing truly bad could happen. Somehow, she'd forgotten he was also human, and that deep down, he was plagued by his own feelings of powerlessness and fear. As if the deaths of his older brothers hadn't been bad enough, their absence meant that he had to shoulder the extraordinary burden of protecting his family from far too tender an age. It had kept him from expanding his social circle, from meeting women, from leading anything remotely like a normal life. And while he had plenty of money to show for it, he seemed to lack the one thing that money could never buy: the respect and gratitude of his family. Jonathan gave her one final squeeze. Maria, if my sister confides in you, please try to remind her to be cautious. The Davis family is a mighty oak that invites strong winds. Nancy nodded. I will. Same goes for you out at that work site. Jonathan kissed her on the head and then released her. You should get going. Nancy snuck across the hall to the women's bathroom, and by the time she emerged, Jonathan had vanished. As she washed her hands, her gaze landed on the empty corridor, and Jonathan's image lingered in her mind. Everyone admired his success, his influence, but few understood the slings and arrows he suffered for being so visible. Drawing a deep breath, she steeled herself against the aching heaviness in her heart and returned to Steve's room. Outside Steve's window, dusk had painted the sky a deep red. The clean air seemed to amplify the vibrant sunset, as if heralding the night's arrival. After a moment admiring the view, Nancy returned to Steve's bedside and continued chatting, reminiscing about the time they had spent together and wondering about all the things he might do in the future. Hours passed, and the sky grew dark. Sophia and her assistants made their way in and out at various intervals, but Nancy remained glued to Steve's side. As night fell, Jonathan arrived back at the site of the explosion. Norman's team had been able to analyze some of the debris, and the evidence pointed towards some of the materials coming from the U.S. Unfortunately, the ordnance itself was unlike any traditional compound in government databases. Whoever built the bomb was clearly an expert and had made themselves effectively untraceable. The only truly useful information Norman was able to uncover was that the explosive compound was extremely fresh, and based on the uneven blast radius, the bomb had likely been assembled in a rush. Jonathan's mind raced as he read the report and gazed out over the flattened control center. Why Steve? And why now? Was it personal? Or was it simply an opportunistic strike at the Davis Group? Moreover, why the rush? If they had wanted to do maximum damage, they would have waited until the facility was up and running. Perhaps the release of the Apex had forced their hand? As Jonathan pondered the possibilities, Travis suddenly came running up to him, his voice frantic with emotion. "Jonathan, it's Steve. What is it?" Travis looked away, and his voice dropped to a hush. "The doctors. They're saying it might be too late." Without a second thought, Jonathan sprinted to the car and rushed back to the hospital, stopping dead in his tracks at the threshold of Steve's room. The sounds of restrained sobbing and the flatlining heart monitor filled his ears. But the scant distance between him and Steve seemed an uncrossable chasm, an abyss between life and death. Still huddled at Steve's bedside, Nancy's tears flowed unchecked. She gently placed the Frida in Steve's hand, her trembling voice breaking the silence. "Steve, I have a secret to share." Leaning close, she whispered in his ear. "The truth is, I'm not Maria. The real Maria loved you with every ounce of her being, and every breath she drew. She died thinking only for you. So don't be afraid, Steve. She'll be waiting for you on the other side with open arms." Nancy's tears spilled onto his face, and as she moved to sit upright, she noticed a faint flutter of his eyelashes. Stunned, she quickly wiped her face, her gaze riveted on Steve. Suddenly, a series of beeps filled the room as the monitor started showing signs of life again. After a charged bear, Steve's eyes finally fluttered open. Nancy gasped. "Everyone! Steve is awake!" Seeing Steve's eyes open, Jonathan shouted for Dr. Monahan. A team of doctors quickly descended upon Steve, checking his vitals while everyone watched nervously from across the room, praying that his miraculous recovery wasn't a false dawn. The 10-minute examination felt like an eternity, but Dr. Monahan eventually turned his face to them, removing his glasses and pressing the bridge of his nose in disbelief. "Well, we've seen something beyond explanation today. We've seen the power of the human will to defy all odds. Steve's condition appears stable. He's out of the woods." Their words triggered a wave of joyous tears, and when caught sight of Steve's lips moving, she leaned in to listen. "Steve, what are you trying to say?" Noticing his parched lips, Nancy quickly fetched him a cup of water, but he only managed to sip before his energy seemed to drain once more. He pushed out a whisper, fragmented and faint. I saw you, Maria." Nancy froze, but before she could clarify, he fell back into a deep sleep. The sight of him resting comfortably brought a collective sigh of relief from the room, and before long, everyone but Nancy had stepped out to get some rest of their own. Steve had no idea what time it was when he woke up next, but the room was bathed in the spectacular glow of the moon, and Maria was asleep in the chair next to him. As he turned to look at her, she stirred awake, and they locked eyes. Seeing her face, he suddenly felt suspended in a timeless trance. Just hours before, he teetered on the brink of death, and though everything was silent and motionless, he had understood the end was near. And that's when he saw Maria. She had an ethereal, almost ghostly quality, but her eyes brimmed with an intensity he'd never witnessed before, as if he were her entire universe. "Steve! My love!" She immediately called out to him, but he remained silent, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she came closer, he realized what it was. The real Maria didn't love him. As he slowly tried to accept that it was nothing but a deathbed fantasy, she stepped closer. Her eyes were filled with compassion, and her hand hovered above his, as though she yearned to touch him but didn't dare. "How can you see me, Steve? Are you dead too?" Steve narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean? What happened to you?" Suddenly, Maria's gaze hardened, and she reached out to clasp his arm. "You can't stay here. I can't let you die." Her voice was urgent and trembling, yet her eyes remained dry. "Go! Live your life." Steve shook his head. "But I want to be with you." Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she'd heard something unthinkable. "If you're dead, Maria, then we'll go together." Abruptly, she released his hand. "No, it's too late for me, but you still have time." Her gaze bore into his, a mixture of reluctance and adoration. "Perhaps we'll meet again one day." With that, she shoved him away, and he found himself flying through a dark void, her figure growing smaller as he pulled towards some unknown destination. He cried out in desperation, "Maria, don't go!" And a voice had come back, as light as air, whispering a sentence he would never forget. "Live well, Steve. I'll always love you." Back in the hospital room, Steve was jolted from the daze of his memory by none other than Maria. "Steve, you're awake. Do you need anything? Some water?" Steve nodded, and as he waited for her to retrieve it, he struggled to square his reality with the vision he had had on the brink of death. The woman that had appeared before him had looked identical to this Maria, but everything else about her seemed different. Was it merely a hallucination of a love lost and regained? A dream that she'd forgotten all about Jonathan and returned to his side? Suddenly, his palm felt a small movement. Before he could react, Frida slipped from his hand and onto the blanket, and Maria scooped it up. "Little Frida got caught in the explosion, too. Once we're back in New York, I'll have it back to full strength in no time. Maybe we can even make some upgrades." In the soft glow of the moonlight, Steve saw the broken form of Frida. One of its arms was missing, and its head had split open, revealing a mass of wires and chips. But he breathed a silent sigh of relief when he realized that the arm with his name carved in it was still intact. Steve finally drained the glass of water that Maria had brought him, and with his throat soothed, he spoke. "2 seconds before the explosion, Frida warned me." Nancy nodded. "It must have been the universal basic signal recognition. I never imagined it being used for something like that." Steve's gaze settled on Frida. "It saved my life. Thank you, Maria." "You saved yourself. The doctors had all but given up hope. We thought." Steve took a deep breath, then met Maria's gaze. "Before I died, I saw you. I was ready to leave, but you pushed me back, and I came back." "I pushed you?" Steve nodded. "You said you were dead too, and that it was too late for you, but I still had time." "What else did you see? What else did I say?" He wanted desperately to tell her what else had happened, that she had grasped his arm and told him she loved him, that she had gazed at him with a look of eternal affection, but he knew he couldn't. Nancy's heart pounded as she considered the implications of what Steve had told her. It seemed he had met the wandering spirit of the real Maria, and that in her undying love for him, she'd sacrificed an eternity together to send him back to the world of the living. A pang of guilt struck Nancy's heart at the thought of the real Maria wandering some spectral void, hopeless and alone. She had lived Maria's life, enjoyed the freshness of existence in her body. Although she'd taken care of Maria's siblings, she hadn't really done anything for Maria herself. All she could hope was that saving Steve had somehow brought her closure, and that maybe, just maybe, Maria might one day be reincarnated too. After Steve finally succumbed to sleep again, Nancy stepped out to stretch her legs and was shocked to find Jonathan still awake. She sat down next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. "Why are you still up?" "Still trying to figure out how I let all of this happen. How's Steve doing? Any better?" Nancy nodded. "He managed to chat and then went back to sleep. But he told me that when he was on the verge of death, the spirit of the real Maria appeared to him. She told him she was dead, but that he still had time. Then she pushed him back from the brink." Jonathan shook his head, bewildered. "If I had heard that 6 months ago, I would have called you crazy. But now..." Nancy nodded. "I figure if I can reincarnate, why not her too?" "If she does, I hope she changes her style." Nancy gasped playfully. "She's dead. Don't make fun of her clothes." Jonathan shrugged. "I'm just saying, before you came along, she was pretty odd." "It was her classmates. They told her Steve had a thing for older women, so she started dressing like she was 40. Nancy sighed. "Love makes women stupid sometimes." "Then why are you so smart?" Jonathan narrowed his eyes, moving closer to her. "Do you not really love me?" Nancy swatted him. "You know what I mean. Besides, you're smarter than I am." Jonathan glanced around to make sure no one else was awake, then placed a soft kiss on the corner of her lips. "You've had a long day. Go get some rest." Jonathan helped her lay out on the couch, then pulled a blanket over her and stepped into Steve's room so he wouldn't be alone. When Nancy finally woke up, the sun was high in the sky. She shot to her feet and pulled herself together in the bathroom, then rushed back to see how Steve was doing. Compared to the day before, the mood had shifted 180 degrees. Although everyone was still whispering, there was an unvarnished note of joy in their voices. As Nancy walked in, Sophia stood and approached her. "Maria, shall we take a walk?" Once they were outside, Sophia finally broached the subject that Nancy was afraid of. "So I hear that when you and Steve broke up, it was your doing." A flutter of unease caused Nancy's heart to skip a beat, but she maintained her composure. "I think we both understood that it wasn't working. But yes, I made the decision. You can see how much I still care about him, though. I think of him as family." Sophia nodded. "I can imagine Steve isn't the easiest man to date. He's always been a bit reserved, and the job requires him to put up a tough facade, but he has a kind heart. He cares about people." Sophia paused, then dropped the bombshell. "I say all of this because he told me earlier that he's still in love with you, and I wonder if you might be open to giving it another shot. Don't think I didn't notice how wonderful you were with him yesterday." Nancy forced a smile, her mind racing over how to gently let Sophia down. "I would be overjoyed if I did anything to help him in his most difficult moment. But Steve and I are like brother and sister now." "Actions speak louder than words, Maria. You've been there for him through thick and thin. And that robot you gave him, I noticed how much care you put into it. It's common for young couples to quarrel and part ways. But you've obviously kept each other in your hearts. All it takes is a simple conversation to set you back on your way." Before Nancy could formulate another response, Sophia ushered her back to the ward where her assistants were waiting. Sophia put her arm around Nancy and made an announcement. "Looks like we have the newest member of the Davis clan." All the women cheered, and Nancy blushed, frantically looking around to make sure Jonathan wasn't in earshot. "Please, Miss Davis, if you'll just let me explain." "Miss Davis? Don't be ridiculous. Call me Mom. Nancy's mind swarmed. Sophia was so overjoyed at Steve's recovery that she couldn't be reasoned with, and Nancy would feel like a monster if she pushed too hard. As she pondered whether to admit to her relationship with Jonathan, the door swung open and Jonathan himself walked in. The resentment Sophia had felt for him the day before suddenly seemed to have disappeared, and she turned to him with a warm smile, her arm still around Nancy's shoulder. Jonathan, did you hear? Your nephew's about to get married. Jonathan staggered back. Sorry, what? Maria here will be the perfect bride. Once Steve's better, we'll start planning the engagement. Nancy shot Jonathan a pleading glance, and he struggled to hide his smirk. Sis, did you ask Maria and Steve what they want? Or did you decide this all on your own? What's there to ask? It's obvious they love each other. And if it feels too fast, then they can just stay engaged for a year or two. Marriage is forever. No need to rush it. One of Sophia's assistants chimed in. 2 years? You might have a grandson by then. Jonathan rubbed his temples and waved his hand in surrender. Can we just drop this until we get back to New York? In the meantime, I've spoken with the doctor, and we can arrange for a medical flight to transfer Steve back in 3 days. Until then, I'll keep investigating the explosion, and you can all help Steve recuperate. Steve remained groggy throughout the first day, but by the second, he was visibly more energetic. Since he was still confined to bed rest, Nancy spent most of her days with him. Meanwhile, Jonathan learned everything he could about the day the explosion took place. Just as Travis had warned, it was proving exceedingly hard to track down anyone who had been at the site that day, and what few men they could identify had largely disappeared for fear of being blamed. While Travis continued to chase leads, Jonathan got to work building stronger ties with the nearby towns, reconstructing the labor system, and beefing up security. What happened to Steve was a nightmare, but it didn't mean they would abandon their project. After all, that's exactly what their enemies wanted. By the third day, the doctors confirmed that Steve's wounds could handle the altitude of flying, and the group made their way back to the private plane that would take them home. Upon landing, Nancy and the group immediately transferred Steve to the hospital, and when Sophia finally stepped out, Nancy seized the chance to talk to him privately. Listen, Steve, when I was sitting with you during your recovery, your mom got the wrong idea about us and kind of ran with it. I tried to talk to her, but she was so excited I couldn't get through. Steve finally seemed to catch her drift, and his lips tightened into a line. I understand. She nodded with gratitude and decided to leave it at that, silently praying that he would someday reconnect with the real Maria, and that her sincerity would win his heart. Anything else? Steve asked. No, just take care of yourself. I'll take Frida back and fix it for you. Nancy knew he didn't understand that Frida had been a gift from the real Maria, not her. But one day he would. After leaving Steve's room, Nancy headed straight for the lab in Brooklyn. As she walked in, her colleagues looked at her in shock. Don't you still have 2 days of leave? And aren't you suspiciously pale for someone who just spent 10 days on the beach? Nancy rolled her eyes. Didn't you see the news about Mexico? Emma narrowed her eyes. Oh no. Did you take your new secret boyfriend to see your old not-so-secret boyfriend? Eduardo let out a huge laugh. Sounds like the weirdest threesome of all time. Nancy gave him a playful kick. Gross, Eduardo. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. Steve's mom was there and is now convinced that he and I are getting married. Jeff and Mark started singing, Here Comes the Bride, and Nancy blushed. Quit it, and get back to work. Our next revolutionary technology won't invent itself. Eduardo flashed his eyebrows. Yeesh, talk about Bridezilla. He winked at Nancy, and she playfully rolled her eyes. As everyone got back to work, Nancy sat down at her station and started in on the broken Frida. Her mind wandered back to the brief, beautiful time that she, Jonathan, and Jacob had spent on the beach. Even if it hadn't lasted long, she was certain it had been the happiest 2 days of her life. 1 week later, word came from Houston that the Franklin Group's board of directors had agreed to a $200 million settlement in their case with Astrodyne and called a meeting to vote on Stark's removal as president and CEO. That morning, Stark holed himself up in his office and read the day's news, hoping for any sign that the media or the markets might not be holding him responsible. Unfortunately for him, the headlines were scathing. Mismanagement at the Franklin Group results in losses of hundreds of millions. Share prices plummet, hammering shareholders. After 3 disappointing quarters and one of the greatest calamities in modern business, the board has called a meeting to vote on the future of their once heralded CEO. From CEO to zero, the man who leveraged nepotism to lead one of America's largest companies has made it clear that he was never fit for the job. Each headline felt like a physical slap, striking Stark's face with the cold, hard facts of his failure. He swiped the pile of newspapers off his desk and picked up his phone, dashing off a desperate text to a mysterious number. "I'm on the brink of ruin. Will you help me?" When no response came, he rose from his chair and straightened his tie. If he was going to walk into his own beheading, he would at least do it with his head held high. Stark had slept in his office the night before, in order to avoid reporters on the eve of the board meeting, and as he stepped out of his office, he noticed a mob of cameras and microphones waiting for him at the front entrance. With clenched fists, he drove down the hall and walked into the boardroom. He was greeted with an array of disdainful smirks and irate stares. The sharks had smelled blood in the water, and they weren't afraid of letting him know it. The chairman stood and directed Stark to the head of the table. "Take a seat, and we'll get started." Stark's face contorted as he sat, gripping his still silent phone with white knuckles. He remained silent as the chairman began. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not waste time on pleasantries. This is the darkest day I've ever witnessed as a member of this board, and it is with extraordinary urgency that I call this meeting into session. In order to restore shareholder confidence and turn a new leaf after the disastrous leadership over the last year, I move that we vote to remove Stark as president and CEO, and place me in the role of an interim basis until we find someone to replace him." "How about my dog? I'm pretty sure he has a higher IQ." "He's certainly more well-liked." As the jabs rained down, Stark's veins pulsed in his forehead. He had considered killing each and every one of the people in the room at one time or another, and he swore to himself that he would find a way to get back at them for this humiliation. Not even the men he had mentored and brought up through the ranks dared to speak a word on his behalf. It was him against the world. He was stunned by how long and hard the fall had been in 4 short years. After the tragic deaths of Nancy and her family, he'd been ushered into the role as the obvious and sentimental choice. And he'd reveled in the media's praise, basking in his public perception as a grieving widow. And for the first few years, everything had gone so smoothly. He'd successfully ushered Nancy's project to market and captured an entire industry. But when had everything started to spiral out of control? One name was stuck in his mind: Jonathan. In the last 6 months, he had repeatedly thwarted Stark's plans, chipping away at his hard-earned prestige and outmaneuvering him at every turn. He no longer had any doubt that Jonathan was responsible for freeing Jacob, but he was at a total loss for how to stop him. With no meaningful shares to speak of, no family, and no personal fortune, Stark suddenly realized how hollow and meaningless it had all been. He was about to be left with nothing. He was finally torn from his daze when the chairman placed a ballot in front of him with a sneer. "Feel free to cast a vote for yourself. At least then you can tell yourself it wasn't unanimous." The votes were quickly tabulated, and when the chairman announced Stark's immediate removal, the entire room let out a cheer. Seething, Stark lurched to his feet and charged for the exit, pretending not to hear the insults being lobbed at him as he left the room. Outside, 2 security guards waited to escort him to his office, confiscate his security pass, and walk him out. As he was led through the office, the pitying faces and turned-down eyes of his lowly employees was almost more than he could bear. Exiting the Franklin Group's headquarters, Stark found himself wading alone through a sea of reporters in the underground parking lot. His rage simmered and threatened to consume him. These vultures, who had once hung around him begging for a minute of his time, had returned to pick the flesh off his bones. Unable to get his car through the throng of people, Stark finally snapped and retreated to a nearby janitor's closet. Locking the door behind him, he collapsed into a corner, his chest a burning cauldron of resentment and despair. His blood boiled with fury, yet he felt utterly impotent. Hours passed, and when it finally sounded like the last of the reporters had left for the night, he cracked the door open and made a break for the bathroom. When he first caught a glimpse of his reflection, he almost didn't recognize himself. Covered in dust, shoulders hunched, dark rings beneath his eyes, he looked nothing like the vibrant, confident, successful man he was just days before. He punched the mirror in frustration, and shards of glass pierced his skin. His blood ran freely into the sink, but he felt no pain. He felt nothing at all. As he picked the shards from his knuckles, a dark laughter echoed from his throat. "I may have lost my job, Edward, and you may have succeeded in keeping your shares from me. But you're nothing but dust at the bottom of the sea. And Nancy, what does it matter if you never looked at me with love, even though you were engaged to me? You and your entire family are food for worms, and I'm still here." He bellowed into the shattered mirror with a look of bitter satisfaction. After catching his breath, he turned on his heel and stalked back to his car. He slammed the door shut behind him, and as soon as he was out of the garage, he gunned the engine. The city's neon lights punctuated the darkness outside as he veered across lanes, narrowly missing pedestrians. After nearly slamming head-on into a semi-truck, he slapped himself across the face. He couldn't allow himself to roll over and die, not while his enemies still drew breath. He repeated the mantra like a lifeline and calmly navigated himself home. When he staggered in the front door, Stark's maid gasped at the sight of his dusty clothing and haggard expression. She tried to fetch something clean, but he dismissed her with a curt wave of his hand and retreated to the bathroom, scrubbing himself clean until his skin was raw and red. Afterward, he studied his reflection in the mirror, now misted over from the steamy shower. He combed his hair and shaved his face, and before long, a slow, wry smile spread across his mouth. He was in the Johnsons' home. He took it from them, like he took everything else, and there was nothing stopping him from rising to the top once again. He just had to do what he'd always done. Stay calm, pick his moment to strike, and then pursue his targets with total ruthlessness. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself, put on his bathrobe, and made his way to the bedroom. No longer confined under the bed, Amelia was huddled in a corner of Stark's room, chained to a support beam. The sight of him sparked fear in her eyes, and she instinctively recoiled. Her once beautiful face was gaunt, her cheeks hollow, and her eyes bulging. Stark stalked toward her like a predator hunting its prey. He opened his bathrobe as if he intended to do something unthinkable, but just as he came within arm's reach, a wave of nausea washed over Amelia, and she retched onto the floor. Stark gazed down at her pallid, trembling body and narrowed his eyes. Before Amelia knew what was happening, Stark had retied his robe and pulled out his phone. As she wiped her mouth and struggled to her feet, she just made out the words he was saying. "Doctor, we need a blood test. I think Amelia is pregnant." Amelia's heart leapt to her throat. In the tumult of the past few months, every day had felt like a struggle to survive, and the possibility of being pregnant had never crossed her mind. But as soon as she thought about it, it all made sense. She'd attributed her lacks of period to malnourishment, but it was undeniable that she'd missed at least 2. And despite how thin she'd become, she had just started to notice her waistline growing ever so slightly. Her mind raced as she contemplated the possibility, and soon a chilling question arose. Whose child was it? Before she could finish making a definitive list of possibilities, the doctor arrived and quickly drew her blood. Moments later, he held up the test tube with a smile. Stark, Amelia, congratulations. Judging by your hormone levels, you're about 2 months pregnant. He narrowed his eyes and tipped his reading glasses down. But you're alarmingly thin, Miss Renner. I know it's part of the job, but we really need to get you back to a healthy weight. Your nutrition is crucial to the baby's development. Amelia nodded wordlessly, her eyes glued to Stark for any indication of what was coming next. Once the doctor had handed over some prescriptions and an appointment schedule, Stark calmly saw him out. But when he returned, his face morphed into a look Amelia had never seen before. Even on the day he'd nearly killed her, his face hadn't held such a terrifying expression. His icy eyes were propped open by a cold, murderous smile, and his stalking movements made him resemble a creature out of a nightmare. Amelia backed up against the wall, her body trembling and heart pounding. Fear seized her as she realized the implications of being 2 months pregnant. The child couldn't be Stark's. In the oppressive silence, she stammered out a plea. What if he made a mistake? The child could be older than 2 months. Or maybe I'm not pregnant at all. I need to go to the hospital for a second opinion. Stark closed the distance between them and brushed his fingers gently against her cheek. His voice was soft, almost tender. Do you even know who the father is? Or is this some sort of scheme? Did you believe I'd spare you if you were carrying a child? Or that I'd be stupid enough to believe it was mine? Stark, I swear, I had no idea. Let's just go to the hospital before we do anything we'll regret. Suddenly, Stark was upon her, grabbing her by her shirt and pushing her up against the wall. He swept a knife from the side table, and the blade glinted as he flicked it open. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't end your life right here, right now. Tears rushed to Amelia's eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. The video. If I die, it'll automatically be sent to every media outlet in the country. Stark smirked, a wolf cornering its prey. Really? That seems a bit advanced for a high school dropout turned model. A surge of defiance rushed through Amelia, lending strength to her voice. Test me then. Kill me and watch your world. Stark's gaze bore into her with a lethal fury, his hand trembling with the effort it took not to drive the knife into her chest. Suddenly, their stalemate was broken by a knock at the door. The voice of the maid trickled through the heavy wooden panel. Sir, Lexi has arrived to see you. In a heartbeat, Stark had pocketed the knife and straightened himself. His outward composure, a shocking contrast to the violence he just displayed. He growled at Amelia to stay put, and then strode out of the room. As soon as the door shut behind him, Amelia looked down and realized he'd forgotten to chain her ankle back to the post. Wasting no time, she sprang toward the window and flung it open. She knew that a jump from the second floor could lead to serious injury. But staying with Stark was a death wish. She grabbed every pillow and blanket in the room and threw it out of the window, hoping it might do anything to break her fall. Then, touching her stomach and saying a prayer, she stepped onto the windowsill and plunged into the night. As soon as Stark made it downstairs, Lexi rushed over to him and nestled into his arms, her voice a gentle murmur. I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was coming, but I've been taking a fashion design class, and I crafted a suit just for you. Take a look. Stark was relieved that she didn't broach the subject of today's cataclysmic news, but between the events that morning and Amelia's pregnancy, he was in no mood to entertain her doe-eyed lover routine. In fact, he realized that it was her very attentiveness that had begun to turn him off. He had always preferred women that made him work for it, and no matter how beautiful Lexi was, she was too simple to keep him interested. As Lexi attempted to dote on him, his mind drifted to Maria. The last time he'd seen her, she was setting her own fear and inquiries aside to take care of an injured little boy. He found himself yearning to be that boy, to be taken care of by her, and a thought suddenly sprang to his mind. If he had met her when he was younger, before he'd grown cold and unyielding, would his life be different? A wave of despair swept over him, blotting out the sun and leaving behind nothing but hollow desperation. At that moment, all he wanted was to escape, to find Maria, take her someplace far away, and start over. Desperate to be rid of Lexi, he reluctantly tried on the suit she made for him and then ushered her to the door. "I'm sorry I've been so preoccupied, but I need to be alone tonight. I'll call you." Lexi nodded. "All right, Stark. Just take care of yourself." As Stark shut the door behind Lexi, the innocent smile drained off her face. It was clear that Stark had tired of her, and her mind raced with thoughts about how she might get him back under her thumb. But as she made her way around the side of the house, she did a rapid double-take. Cowering in the bushes, covered in grass stains, was none other than Amelia. As Lexi approached, Amelia nearly collapsed at her feet. "Lexi, please, help me. Don't hand me over to Stark." Lexi glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then bent down, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's in it for me?" The video. I'll tell you where it is." Lexi's mouth curled into a smile. Clocking the locations of the outdoor cameras, she quickly helped Amelia to her feet, and they slipped back to the road where Lexi's cab was waiting. Nancy was alone at her hot spring house that night, and she was just about to turn the lights off in her bedroom when her phone suddenly rang. As she glanced at the name on the screen, her drowsiness evaporated instantaneously. It was Stark. Sitting up in bed, she answered the call. "Stark? What is it?" To her surprise, his voice trembled. "Maria, did I disturb you?" "No, I'm still up. Do you need something?" "I just wanted to hear your voice. These last couple of days have been rough." Nancy stifled the unbridled joy she felt when she heard about Stark's firing and remained calm. "It'll take some time for the wounds to heal, but don't beat yourself up. Everyone has their highs and lows." "I didn't get dropped from the high school basketball team. I lost everything I've worked for." Nancy clenched her teeth. Everything he'd ever had, he'd stolen from her. Before she could find the words to respond, Stark chimed back in, his tone increasingly desperate. "Do you really have nothing to say? Are you turning your back on me like all the rest?" "Of course not. I just can't imagine what you're going through." "I feel useless, like a complete failure. Everyone is laughing at me, and I have no idea how I'll ever get a job again." Nancy rolled her eyes at Stark's melodrama, then cleared her throat. "I think you're letting the media narratives get to you. Why would anyone, especially me, think you're useless? You're barely 30 years old and run one of the largest companies in Texas. Most men double your age can't say that. Every CEO gets fired sometime, and now you have the rest of your life to learn from the experience. Think of it as an opportunity to start fresh." Stark sighed. "Oh, Maria, if only you were here with me. I can't open the internet or step out of my front door without being bombarded with proof of my failure. You wouldn't believe it, but I holed up in a janitor's closet for 8 hours today, just to avoid the reporters." Nancy laughed. "Just one more sign of your resourcefulness. Trust me, time will pass and people will forget. You'll get another shot if you stick with it. Hell, why not start your own company?" Stark's voice hitched. "I don't know if I can." "If you don't mind me saying, there are a lot of people in the world facing higher climbs than you right now. You're healthy, you're wealthy, and you're whole. Are you really going to throw all of that out over a little bruised pride?" Stark paused, then his voice suddenly sounded firmer. "I'm so grateful for you. You still encourage me, even when I've hit rock bottom. If, if I..." Nancy's eyes narrowed as his voice quivered. In 2 lifetimes, she never heard Stark speak like this. He continued stammering. "If I can rise again, will you..." "What is it, Stark?" "Nothing. Just know that because of you, I'm going to find a way back. Wait for me." All right, you have my word. I can't wait to see what you do next. Well then, I'll let you get to bed. Good night, Maria. When Stark finally hung up, Nancy's mind swirled with equal amounts of revulsion and satisfaction. She knew that the reason she'd never heard Stark speak like this is because he'd never been in love with her. But it was all too obvious he was in love with her now. As much as part of her was disgusted by it, she knew it would make this downfall all the more painful. No longer able to sleep, Nancy got out of bed and grabbed a pad of paper. It was time she got serious about stealing that video from Amelia. Stark stayed on his balcony, staring at the stars as he replayed his conversation with Maria. He hadn't expected himself to pour out so many emotions, but she'd taken his shame and his pain and turned it into the fuel that would power his comeback. Then, when he was back on top, he intended to sweep her off her feet and place her on the throne beside him. She was going to be his North Star. He made his way back inside, but as soon as he pushed open his bedroom door, he could tell something was off. Quickly realizing Amelia had jumped out of the window, a deep frown creased his face, and he screamed out for his maids. Meanwhile, Amelia and Lexi were hiding out in the courtyard of a small apartment building near the cemetery. Amelia's body was a map of injuries that throbbed with pain whenever she relaxed, and the horror of Stark threatening to stab her lingered like a relentless specter. Lexi emerged from a nearby room and poured a glass of water for Amelia. Stark just texted me and said he's turning the house upside down looking for you. He said you're pregnant with another man's baby, and if he finds you, he's going to kill you both. Amelia's grip on the glass suddenly grew weak, causing it to drop to the floor and shatter. But Lexi didn't flinch, lighting a cigarette before settling down in a chair. You know, Amelia, you always overshadowed me. You stole jobs from me. You stole men from me. If you were around, I knew I would always be begging for scraps. Amelia simmered, but didn't respond. But now I'm looking at you, and it's impossible to imagine. In the past, Amelia would have launched herself at Lexi for something like that. But she no longer had room for anything in her heart except loathing for Stark. Lexi continued. I mean, why did he even keep you around for so long? Seems like he's just punishing himself by having a look at you. Her eyes blazed with fury. Why would he keep me around? He's scared of me. Lexi flashed her eyebrows. Ah, yes. This famous video. Is it even real, Amelia? Or is it as fake as your boobs? Amelia snapped her head towards Lexi. Let's cut the crap, okay? You're a bully and a monster. I've heard all about the things you did to the other girls at the agency. I bailed you out because I thought you might be able to help me. But I can undo it at the press of a button. And I have a hunch that Stark would be so appreciative. So why don't you hurry up and tell me what you've got? Lexi's words hit Amelia like a bucket of ice water. She knew Stark would kill her if he thought he would get away with it. And if she gave Lexi the video, she'd have no cards left to play. It suddenly felt like she was damned either way. Unfazed by Amelia's silence, Lexi took a long drag from her cigarette, then exhaled with a sigh. If it makes you feel any better, Stark's already smitten with someone new. Maybe you'll get lucky, and he'll just forget you ever existed. Amelia looked up at her, narrowing her eyes. He's in love with someone else? The beautiful young face of unique perfumes, Maria something. Amelia's expression twisted into a scowl, and she snarled through gritted teeth. That witch. Lexi shrugged. She got her hooks in him somehow. I slipped Stark a roofie last week to see if I could get him to spill any dirt, but all he would talk about was her. He said she's the only woman he's ever loved, and he plans to whisk her away to another country where they'll buy some land and grow their own crops. Maybe he'll plant her a sea of sunflowers. Amelia's mouth fell open. He said that? Lexi couldn't help but chuckle. So dreamy, right? He even plans on them having 2 kids, a boy and a girl. A picture-perfect family. I guess you'll just never inspire the devoted husband and father in him. Amelia's fists clenched, and her eyes flickered with fury. He was envisioning a future with Maria, while planning to imprison her until she died? She was pregnant, for God's sake. Her heart pounded, and her mind swirled with unhinged hatred and resentment. She and Stark had done unspeakable things together. They had blood on their hands. And now he thought he could discard her like trash and escape to another country to live out his days in peace? Amelia would die before she'd let that happen. Suddenly, it occurred to her. There was a third option besides being turned over to Stark or giving Lexi her only ammunition. She could release the video herself. Releasing it would undoubtedly spell Stark's doom. But what about her own fate? Fear seized her momentarily, but a glance at her swelling stomach reignited the fury in her chest. She had nothing to lose anymore, and if she was destined for a tragic end, she'd make damn sure that Stark went down with her. Abruptly, Amelia snatched the cigarette from Lexi's grasp and snubbed it out. As they locked eyes, Amelia let out a guttural laugh. "So you want to know about the video, do you?" Lexi narrowed her eyes at Amelia, thrown by her sudden willingness to talk about the video. Ever since Amelia had first mentioned it to her, she'd gone back and forth on whether to believe it even existed. Ultimately, she still felt such a debt of gratitude to the Johnson family that she decided to keep pushing. It seemed the moment of truth was finally at hand, and she struggled to remain calm. "So it is real." Amelia smirked viciously. "Oh, it's very real, all right? You know Stark killed all three of them? Threw the mom off a balcony and burned the other two alive. And you have video proof? Say what you want about me, but I'm a survivor. I knew he'd eventually turn on me, so I made sure I had collateral. But if he thinks he can get rid of me and run off with no consequences, he's got another thing coming." Lexi's breath hitched. She played Amelia like a fiddle up to this point, but she was starting to sound reckless. Whatever happened, Lexi's first priority was not to get caught up in Amelia's mess. She took a deep breath, and her tone was suddenly firm. "That wasn't the deal, Amelia. I helped you escape, so you give me the video. If you don't like that, I've got Stark on speed dial." Amelia scowled, but eventually conceded. "Fine, I'll send you the file, but I'm doing this my own way." "Fine, as long as I approve of your way." Just as the transfer to Lexi's phone completed, a commotion outside grabbed their attention. Lexi saw a group of men scouring the block with flashlights, and her eyes went wide. She shot an alarmed glance at Amelia. "It's Stark's men. He clearly suspects we're together." She thought for a moment, then peeked down the street to see if the coast was clear. "My grandfather is a groundskeeper at the cemetery. I know where we can lay low until we decide what to do." Minutes after they disappeared into the tombstones, a man in all black kicked in the gate to Lexi's courtyard. Moments later, Stark received a call from one of his henchmen, and his face contorted with rage. "Keep searching. Find them, no matter what it takes." Stark's mind reeled. If Amelia was desperate enough, there was a chance she might actually do the unthinkable. He quickly dialed another number. "Monitor Amelia's social media and call every major newspaper. I want a catch and kill in place for anything associated with my name. Cost is no object." He knew Amelia hadn't gotten far on her own, and as long as she remained nearby, he was confident he could find her. And once he did, he would make sure she faced a fate worse than death. If Lexi was with her, she would get the same. The next morning, Nancy arrived in Houston to attend a marketing event on behalf of Unique. She heard that Maria's sister Angela was about to have some time off, so Nancy planned to wrap up the event in time to pick up her and Henry and take them back to New York, where all the siblings could be together. The Unique event was hosted in the banquet hall of a luxury hotel in Houston, and in an attempt to keep Stark on her string, she let him know of her plans. Though she wasn't surprised when he showed up, she was shocked at what he was wearing. For the first time since he was a child, he was wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap. If a face wasn't seared so deeply into her mind, she might not have recognized him at all. He didn't notice her entrance, so she quietly slipped past him and made her way inside. She noticed him beaming in the front row of her entire presentation, and when the event finally ended, she was desperate to get away from his predatory gaze. As she hurried backstage, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jonathan. Stark has been sending out a ton of men the last 24 hours. I can't confirm, but my guess is he's looking for Amelia. Nancy responded swiftly. Understood. I'm at the event, and he showed up as expected. I'll try to pry some information out of him. Be careful, darling. Slipping her phone away, Nancy changed into her street clothes, steeled herself for an afternoon with Stark, and walked back out to the lobby. Stark was waiting for her by the exit, and upon seeing her, he rushed over. Do my eyes deceive me, or is Stark Green wearing denim? One of the perks of not representing a public company every second of your life. Is it just the skinny jeans, or do you look thinner? And your eyes? Have you not been sleeping? Stark sighed. I haven't. It's been a difficult week. But just seeing you brings me so much joy. It would seem your companionship is the ultimate medicine. Nancy could feel the hair on her arms rise, but she forced a smile. Oh, come on. You have plenty of friends. By the way, has Amelia quit the business? Her face used to be everywhere, and I feel like I haven't seen her in months. Nancy noticed Stark's grip tighten around his phone. Yes, she's left the industry. And Houston altogether, from what I hear. I haven't heard from her in ages. Nancy had to fight back a smirk. His displeasure over Amelia was evident. By all appearances, he truly lost her this time. Well, enough about the past. What are your plans moving forward, Stark? Actually, I'm thinking of moving to France, starting anew. Would you like to come with me? Nancy's heart twisted. Stark knew full well that France wouldn't extradite to the United States. That meant that even if she did manage to find Amelia and get her hands on the video, if he had left the country, she'd never be able to truly hold him accountable. She feigned a look of flattered surprise. As nice as Paris sounds, I have work obligations here. When are you leaving, though? Maybe I can rearrange my schedule. Stark grasped her hand in excitement, and she instinctively pulled away. He looked thrown for a second, but it seemed to dissipate just as quickly. That's wonderful news. I just have to tie up some loose ends and line up a job. Then we can take off whenever we want. I'll take care of everything. You can work if you want, or even go to grad school. Nancy bit her lip, appearing to easily reach a decision. I have been considering grad school. All right, Maria. Then it's settled. As soon as it's arranged, I'll let you know. After lunch with Stark, Nancy had an appointment with her new head of marketing at the Franklin Group. She had heard that the board was purging anyone associated too closely with Stark, so she fully expected her contract to be bought out and terminated. When the marketing director handed her her termination papers, she couldn't help but smile. When he expressed surprise at her reaction, she scrambled to find an answer. I'm just excited for the future. The truth was that she no longer had any use for the job because they'd successfully run Stark out. Sitting in the conference room signing her contract buyout, Nancy felt for the first time in her entire life like she'd gained the upper hand on him. As she was leaving, she overheard a murmured conversation between the marketing director and his assistant. Why hasn't Lexi shown up yet? Not sure, sir. She hasn't answered her phone in days. Probably tied up in Stark's bedroom from what I hear. Nancy's eyes narrowed. If Lexi was missing too, that likely meant that either Stark was holding her captive or she had something to do with Amelia's disappearance. Contemplating this, she pulled out her phone and typed a message. Stark, you won't believe it. The Franklin Group terminated my contract. Stark was quick to respond. I'm so sorry, Maria. This is all my fault. Nancy had to hold back a gagging sensation as she replied with a winky face. Don't worry. I only joined in the first place because you were there. Seems like Lexi might be next on the chopping block. They said she's probably with you. Don't get the wrong idea. I mentored her, but our relationship is strictly professional. Nancy rolled her eyes. Well, if you know where she is, you might want to let her know they're looking for her. I haven't seen her since the day I got fired. Please believe me." The urgency in Stark's responses gave Nancy the sense that he was telling the truth. If that was the case, then all the more reason to think that Lexi and Amelia were somehow connected. Following her hunch, she sent a quick message to Jonathan. "I'm starting to think Amelia and Lexi are together. Can you look into her background? When I met her in my past life, her name was Alexis Carter." When Nancy left the Franklin group, she caught a cab to surprise Angela at her office downtown. But just as the cab got within a few blocks, the driver pulled to a stop and explained that she'd have to walk because all the streets were blocked for a movie shoot. As she walked past the film set, she saw the celebrity at the center of the scene, and her jaw dropped. A stunning young man in a suit leaned against a car and had a flirtatious conversation with his co-star. The breeze ruffled his perfect hair, and his striking cheekbones embodied both rugged masculinity as well as a hint of playfulness. Nancy stepped closer, and when the shot concluded, she managed to catch the man's wandering gaze. With a provocative wink, Nancy blew him a kiss and dramatically mimed a heart with her hands. He choked on a sip of water in surprise, and when he finally finished coughing, Nancy waved and sauntered over with a swing in her step. She couldn't wait to tell Esther. She'd just seen her brother Dan. Technically speaking, she'd seen Esther's cousin, but he'd been raised alongside Esther like a sibling, along with their middle brother Oliver. Nancy remembered Oliver as a somewhat distant figure, absorbed in his own affairs and rarely interacting with the rest of them. Dan, however, was another story. He was only 6 months older than Nancy and Esther, and his exuberant energy was one of the things Nancy remembered most fondly about childhood. Eventually, Esther's father envisioned the two brothers inheriting the family business, but their aspirations were rooted elsewhere. Oliver got a PhD in geology, while Dan took a boyish charm to Hollywood. By the time Nancy disappeared, Dan had already become one of the fastest rising stars in the industry, but he never lost his modesty and playfulness. Though she still sensed the same energy from him, it caught her off guard seeing it in a body of a 30-year-old man. It was a stark reminder that time eventually changes all of us. While the filming continued, Nancy made her way to Angela's office. Approaching the front desk, she was about to inquire about Angela when she suddenly spotted her long-estranged sister in a nearby conference room. The tentative and directionless woman that Nancy remembered from Maria's memories had been transformed into a vision of confidence. She wore a striking pantsuit and sported a chic haircut, and she was commanding a room full of men twice her age. Nancy couldn't help but smile. All Maria's siblings had ever wanted was for Angela to find her path and be happy. And in that moment, it was abundantly clear that she had done just that. Not wanting to interrupt, Nancy made a quiet exit and decided to catch up with her later. As she exited the office building, she was just about to call Esther when Jonathan called her instead. His voice was direct and all business. "Maria, I found out that Lexi has a foster grandfather who oversees a big cemetery north of town. If she and Amelia are hiding out, that would probably be a pretty good place." Nancy was stunned. The cemetery Jonathan was talking about was the one where her own empty grave lay. Suddenly, she was reminded of the mystery flowers that had been laid on her mother's grave when Nancy visited with Stark. Could it be that Lexi was responsible?